Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY, called Contact Procedures Volume H Chapter 4, written by MeatFcker. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas.
CICTAS Redoubtable Soulgate. I want to do what? Asked Captain Merkel, surprised was plain on a normally calm voice. Launch a scout ship, sir, replied the ensign, delivering the news. They have an experiment that they want to test on the Repulse. Repulse, half an hour since they classified the invaders, and they already had a nickname. From the way the crew was treating the new info dump, it seemed like they were only one brilliant master plan away from driving the swarm back through the gate. Only they weren't. Lieutenant Dross's weapons console had access to a full tactical lot, and he could see that they were losing. They might kill 1,000 of these bastards' ships for every Terran hull that they lost, but their odds were still a hell of a lot worse than 1,000 to 1. Fleet's best estimates put the swarm at close to 1 billion unique platforms. There's a reason. Merkel paused as a greater blow shook the ship. The screens weren't even whining anymore. If the colossal TAS ram hadn't been the target of 9 out of 10 every incoming shots, they would have gone up in flames an hour ago. There's a reason why we haven't launched any of our insects, continued the captain. One unlucky hit and they're done, and we need to sit tight and bide our time. Tell them no, ensign. Merkel stared straight forward and she said those words. Dross, who turned his head to watch the exchange, was shocked at the deadness in her eyes. Her voice might be confident, but she reached the same conclusion as the weapons officer had. They had no haste in the hole, no boarding party steadily working their way towards the enemy flagship's bridge, and no doomsday weapon that they could wash over the ripples and leave behind the harmless cloud of carbon dust. No hope, really. And now Merkel just got going to sit there, complacent in her own death. In all of the deaths, she might not have been an admiral in charge of this clusterfrick, but she was still responsible for every man, woman, and Xeno aboard the Redoubtable. God damn this conscience, thought Dross. I am no fricking hero. He rose from his station and suddenly became aware of the 2 martial sentries posted just inside the CIC's door. They wore full battle armor and carried loaded flechette cannons, just like they had done since the distant Unification Wars, from back when mutiny had been a very real threat. Excuse me, Captain Merkel, I think that you should at least reconsider. We need that ship out there. Pardon me, Lieutenant. Merkel's tone was sharp and cutting. Dross waited for the Redoutable's armor to finish absorbing another grazer blow before continuing. We're losing this fight, sir. We don't have any ships smaller than the battleship left. It won't be long before we're running awfully low on those 2. What happens when we start losing dreadnoughts? The ram. We're the most effective naval force in the system, sir, and we're just sitting here, reacting. It's the initiative that let us beat the Galactic Compact with tech 100 centuries out of date. The Redoutable's deck heaved again, and Dross paused. Merkel broke in before he could resume. And what would you have me do, Lieutenant? Waste the lives on an endless string of fool's errands, break formation, and leave the squadron to die? We stand together, or we die alone. Return to your station before I have you removed from the CIC. Dross stayed standing. He swallowed as one of the sentries stepped forward, the Marine's expression hidden behind his matte black armored helmet. At least try something, sir. Have someone qualified look at the scout ship's proposal. Maybe Lieutenant Slater. He's supposed to have a degree from the Kuiper Tech, and I'm sure that he could make sense of it. But don't just dismiss it out of hand. You yourself said that the strength of the fleet has always come from the men and women serving aboard it. Every man and woman, not just those with admiral epaulets. The last line seemed to get through to the captain. She waved off the sentry and slumped back in her chair, not even trying to hide the exhaustion anymore. Very well then, Dross, see that Lieutenant Slater receives a copy of Haverford's proposal. Keep me updated on the developments. You're not doing anything at your console that can't be automated. Dross winced a bit at that. He'd already written a small script and tweaked the Redoutable's firing pattern as the grazer blisters fell offline and returned to active. It would be trivial to have it prompt for a human input if the flow of the battle changed. And give that scout ship permission to launch, continued the captain. At least one of us should have the chance to decide their own fate. Redoubtable Scout Ship 05 Soulgate. Sub-Lieutenant Sleek Wing's gentle glide slid her aphid-class scout ship out of the Redoubtable's port hangar with some trepidation. When Chief Petty Officer Haverford and Master Spacer Walker had first pitched the idea, it seemed great to get outside the Dreadnought's hull, determine exactly how far the ripples had spread, and then test Haverford's contraption. Easy, straightforward, and simple. Wouldn't even take 10 minutes, they said. One loop around the ship, a short stop, and then they'd be back in the relative safety of the hangar. Now Sleek was starting to wish that she'd turned her human crew down, rather than the wide open expanse of freedom that she'd pictured from the inside of the hangar. The scout ship hovered on the edge of a claustrophobic death trap. The bright flashes of grazer beams ripped past through the space-time and lit up the scene, revealing the lightly packed Terran warships that stood against the swarm. The broken, the shattered hulls of the dead freighters and cruisers drifted amidst them, forcing the formation to bulge in awkward places. Sleek couldn't see any escape pods. Worse than any of that, though, was the lack of stars. The swarm of rebels was so thick that it had hid the sun and stars. Whenever Sleek had read the phrase of human books, she had always dismissed it as a brief chuckle. Clouds blocked out the sun and stars all the time, yet nobody was afraid of clouds. It had always seemed such a trivial thing to be afraid of, and a weird human quirk that the Neji didn't possess. Now, however, the full weight of that phrase hit her. This was space. You should always be able to count the sun and stars. Haverford's hand settled on her shoulder. You can do this, sir. You're the best pilot that I've ever had the pleasure of serving under. There was something comfortable in the weight of the portly engineer's hand. Sleek could feel the raw power and the strength of the grip. She didn't doubt that Haverford could have crushed her shoulder with barely a grunt of effort, but there was also a deliberate, gentle tenderness. Sleek turned the nose of the scout ship back towards the hull. Beside her, Walker gasped, the first sound he'd made since they'd launched. The Neji was more than a little surprised that he hadn't fallen back asleep. That's a lot of rebels, he said. How the hell are there that many rebels on the ship? The matte black hull of the Redoubtable was marred by huge swaths of boiling grey, probably as much as 2/3 of the ship. It's a damn swarm, complained Haverford. Too many emissions flooding the ship for us to be able to distinguish between the ones in spitting range and those firing from the bleachers. At least you've got your invention, said Sleek conversationally. She added, by the way, how exactly did you attach it to the hull? All I saw was a great tape. That'd be it, said Haverford. No way I'd get to welding rig for a personal project in the middle of a goddamn scrum. If Sleek's implants had still been functioning, she would have calmed her sudden spike of anxiety with a quick search of the net. Instead, she tried to convince herself that Haverford knew what he was doing and that there was no risk in the device. A pulse rifle with the safety stripped, snapped to the portable EM generator, flying off and blowing a hole in the Redoubtable's hull. Or their hull, for that matter. The human engineer was too clever for that. Sleek flinched every time the enemy grazer strike came within 100 meters of the scout ship. Their energy screens whined with near misses more and then once as the circuit of the Redoubtable's massive hull. They completed their loop with the Sleek brought them back against the Dreadnought, this close to the gathered rebels, and Neji could almost make out the dizzying array of geometric shapes that rippled across the surface of the sludge. It was unsettling. Ready, Haverford? Asked Walker. The bastard sounded bored again. Firing it up now, Walker. You keep our grazers hot, just in case. And risk punching a hole in our own ship, nodded Chance. Point defense is on standby, and the gimpy little anti-personnel turret is deployed. But the grazers won't have a lick of juice in them until I've convinced they're necessary. Whatever you say, kid. Activating the generator at 70% now. The sludge reacted instantly. Before Haverford's fingers had left the switch, it had shied away from the scout ship and condensed. Sleek watched with disbelief as the shapeless goop transformed itself into hundreds of small, spider-like forms, with a handful of larger silhouettes mixed into the mess. Flashes of distorted light struck the scout ship, and Sleek heard their screens begin to rumble. Grazers, thought the Neji. They're firing miniature grazers. Beside her, Walker let out a whoop. There is something that I can get behind. If you'd be so kind enough to angle us down slightly, sir, I'll bring the top point defense systems down to bear on the buggers. Oh, and Haverford, pump up the juice on that generator. Let's see if we can force them to make an even bigger target. This could be fun. Marine Armory, TAS Redoubtable, Soulgate. Lieutenant Slater stared at the schematic in front of him in disbelief. CPO Haverford is insane. Why is that? Asked Major Gallard, the commander of the Redoutable's Marines complement, which had been watching Slater with interest ever since they'd received orders from Captain Merkles to scour the ship clean with these fricking stowaways. He cracked open a mini-reactor on one of the Mark 7 pulse rifles, sir, replied Slater. They used to strip down Mark 7s for fricking bombs during the Mylar insurrection. Haverford pretty much used the same procedure to bypass the safeties. Well, minus the last step, and that's the one that makes it go boom. Damn. So what exactly do you want to do with this then? Make more. Slater glanced around the armory, mentally adding up how many generators that were needed to equip every scout ship, fast attack craft, and marine fire team on the Redoubtable. Although we can use field batteries instead of rifles for the next batch, far less likely to blow a hole in our own ship. Dewdrop Mount 1 Spaceport Mars. Tweety watched Calloway stare at the forward display of the Dewdrop small bridge, wondering yet again how anything could stand so still. It seemed to be a uniquely human trait. A formation of Nechi could only last 4 or 5 minutes before one of them twitched a wing or fluffed a crest. But Tweety had seen entire companies of humans stand unmoving for hours at a time. It was mystifying. Jenkins was slouched in his chair near the back of the bridge, nursing a fizzy, non-alcoholic drink. Without Calloway's vehement refusal to allow alcohol onto the bridge, the man would have probably been well and truly drunk. Naomi, Calloway's wife, was probably still in the ship's engineering compartment. She'd only popped up briefly to talk to their guests before returning to whatever project kept her occupied below. The Dewdrop had been sitting in the hangar awaiting launch clearance for the better part of 2 hours. Civilian liftoffs had been suspended while the home fleet dealt with the incursion. Not that we're likely to come out on top, thought Tweety bitterly. If the reports are accurate, the Terrans may have finally found their match. The Council hadn't made an official pronouncement since they declared the state of ongoing invasion, an emergency measure that granted near total power to the office of the chairman. That meant martial law, the activation of local militias, and an increase in the already massive power afforded to the Terran marshals. And, of course, it had grounded the Dewdrop and trapped Jenkins, Calloway, Tweety, and Naomi on the ship. They wouldn't be going anywhere without the fleet's say-so. You heard anything about the flock, Tweety? Nechi was surprised to hear Calloway speak. The bridge had been silent for quite some time. Yes, actually, although only rumors. The flock lords are being cagey, as usual. Some of the larger clans are trying to prepare for an evacuation, but they're having difficulty assembling. The cities are fortifying as we're about to get hit by the compact slavers. Of course, we're still fighting the last war, said Jenkins. I thought we moved beyond this after the unification. Fat chance of that ever happening, said Calloway. We're human, after all. Tweety, my contacts are pretty much saying the same thing. Lots of digging in and locking down and not enough evac prep. He paused. Everyone here has seen the leaked reports. This isn't the Galactic Compact invasion. However, the brass has decided to treat it. We can't do much about it from here, said Jenkins. The Dewdrop won't get clearance to launch until we're waist deep in ripples, and there's no way the hell that we're getting out of the spaceport on foot. They're turning this place into a citadel. I might have a solution to that, said Calloway. A friend of mine in the local fleet detachment has been kind enough to bring up a convenient gap in the Navy's launch schedule. There's a 3-minute window and a quarter past the hour. If you guys are fine with some mild and easily avoidable treason charges, it'll be a trivial launch for us. I'm in, said Tweety. We can do a lot more in space than we can from down here. Me too, said Jenkins. But when this is over, you're going to tell us exactly what you did before you wrote poetry. You're starting to scare me. Redoubtable Scout Ship 05 Soulgate. Sleek grimaced as Walker let out an admiring whistle. The human had absolutely no sense of pitch. She could have produced a purer note by waving her wing feathers back and forth through the air. Haverford didn't notice Walker's abysmal tuning, though. He was too busy watching the carnage below. The line of Aphid-class scout ships and Cricket-class fast attack craft was sweeping across the hull of the Redoubtable, scouring the vast swaths of replicator sludge that colored the dreadnought. The sheer number of interference generators attached to the Terran vessels forced the repels to cluster into forms the size of small cars. Once those masses were cracked open, the scattered sludge was quickly dissolved by the generator's Strongium fields. Wallace and Haverfield were having a blast. Sleek wasn't. While the humans were caught up in the thrill of slaughter, she was fixated on the number of ships that they were losing in the process. The swarm's razor blasts were starting to focus on the line of small Terran craft, and more than a dozen vessels had already been picked off. Their ship could be shot down at any second. The retreating sludge left behind visible weakened armor and, in some places, gaping holes where the repels had burrowed into the Redoubtable's hull. The sludge had been dug in for quite some time. Why had they only noticed the extent of the damage now? It seemed like this much damage should have made itself known sooner than that. There was no use worrying about it for now, though. Sleek had her orders, and the Neji would be damned if she let Walker and Haverford down. CIC TAS Redoubtable, Soulgate. Lieutenant Dross, what is the status of our anti-boarding operations? They've scrubbed nearly a third of the hull, sir. Marine fire teams are responding to internal incursions as we're becoming aware of them too. But there's a lot more repels inside the Redoubtable than we expected. It's a miracle that we haven't suffered any. The lights on the bridge suddenly shut off, plunging the compartment into near total blackness. Dross held on a brief second of hope that this was just an isolated incident. But the banks of consoles lining the CIC soon followed the illumination system. Systems failures, finished Dross lamely. The dull emergency lights cast just enough illumination for them to see Captain Merkel glaring at him. Thank you for your useful insight, Lieutenant. You've got enough redundancies in place to survive a Nova. What's the status of the fleet? Not good, sir. Ensign Peters sounded tired. Everyone went dead at once, even the ram. Goddamn repels must have been biding their time, mused Merkel, waiting to take us down together. Any way to get the eyes on the situation? We're still receiving updates from the small craft we deployed, sir. They're reporting that the enemy has ceased fire. Well, that explains why we're not dead yet, said Merkel. Anything else? Yes, sir, the swarm is beginning to close in. If we don't do something fast, we're going to be overrun. TAS Redoubtable, Soulgate. All hands, this is the captain speaking. The enemy has effected a catastrophic loss of power on the entire fleet. We've been crippled. Most of the major systems are inoperable, and we still remain in communications amongst the fleet and our deployed small craft. The crew on one of our scout ships, Sub-Lieutenant Sleek Wings Gentle Glide, Chief Petty Officer Haverford, and Master Spacer Walker, have volunteered to fly formation with the home fleet until the last. They will inform us when we're about to be overrun. The rest of our small craft will attempt to break through the swarm and inform the Terran Council of our fate. We will not be launching escape pods. None of us will fall into the enemy hands today. Engineering, you are hereby authorized to detonate the ship's reactor on my mark. Just because they've cut our conduits doesn't mean that we can't still blow up the generator. Everyone else should destroy any potential sources of intelligence and replicators could exploit. We're not taking any more chances today. It's been a pleasure serving with you. Now let's give 'em hell. Engineering deck TAS Redoubtable Soulgate. Huh, said Slater. The intercom's just cut out. That could be a problem. What could possibly go wrong now? Master Corporal Smith glanced over the towering lieutenant with a frown. The fricking ship's dead in the water. We never did figure out if those things understood our language. Off in the distance, a faint echoing of small, sharp claws tapped against the ship's metal bulkheads could be heard. It was growing louder. Slater glanced around. Behind him was the thick, heavy door of the reactor compartment. There was no visible air vents or ducts in the room, thank God. But there was also no other officers, only Slater. One day, he thought, the universe will realize that I'm not a goddamn combat trooper. Weapons ready, he barked. They're coming. The dozen Marines assigned to Slater trained their weapons into the 2 doors leading into the workshop without a word. Only 2 of them were armed with anything more than a freshet sidearms, and none of them wore battle armor. The clicking grew louder. Slater nodded at the handful of engineers who stepped out of the reactor compartment, withdrawn the sidearms on their own. All but one of their spacers took up a position in the firing line. The last one, a graying chief petty officer, stood ready to twist the bulky key that would turn the redoubtable into an expanding fireball. When they make it through the doors, we fall back into the reactor compartment. Don't forget for the interference generators, whatever happens, we do not let them gain access to the control systems. Slater's gaze drifted across the prototype generator that Haverford had slapped together. He grabbed it by its still attached strap and idly slung it over his shoulder, wishing that he could fire it instead of his firearm. The pistol looked tiny in his oversized hand, and his burnt right palm made it a bit awkward to hold. The tapping rose up to a crescendo, and the unseen wave crashed against the sealed doors of the compartment. Small holes began to open up in the thick metal, and the Marines opened fire. Grazer 37 TAS Redoubtable Soulgate. "I guess it's up, boys," said Chief Petty Officer Gregor, when the announcement faded. "It's been fun. At least we don't have to buy the Marine ground pounder a bar." Master Spacer Wallace voices tight with strain. "My wife would have shot me if I spent that much money." "You know," began Spacer Chan, "just because our consoles are down doesn't mean the Grazers are offline. Its core is on a completely different circuit, which means that we can set the safeties to pop after the reactor goes critical." Gregor finished. "Add a bit of dirty radiation to the mix. I'll spread the word amongst the nearby blisters," said Wallace. "You guys rig up the gun to go Nova." Redoubtable Scoutship 05 Soulgate. Sleek, Haverford, and Walker watched the swarm grow closer. "Reckon the fireball will get 'em all?" asked Walker. "Doubtful," replied Haverford, "but we don't have to wipe them out. Just thin the ranks a bit. Give Earth and Mars and the Belt some time to respond." Sleek didn't say anything. The Neji just stared at attack plot, silently counting down the seconds towards her death. "I'd never get a chance to introduce you to my wife." Walker pulled a picture out of his pocket of his skin suit and held it up for inspection. "Damn pretty, ain't she?" Sleek glanced up at Haverford's chuckle. She certainly couldn't see anything funny about the picture. "She puts up with your ugly bug?" asked Haverford. "Now I've seen everything. You must have been one smooth bastard to land her." "Hardly. Things just kinda happen," Walker frowned. "Kinda wish we'd gotten around to having kids before I slipped off Redoubtable. We'd always look forward to raising a family." "Hey, at least you've got us. We're quite the family." Haverford's gesture encompassed the entirety of the small crew. Sleek, remember that one furlough in Europa? Couldn't ask for a better bonding trip than that." Sleek shuddered. "You guys were so drunk that you could barely walk, and you talked me into spending the night at the Marine bar. You're goddamn lucky nobody there was armed. I was a little surprised when you jumped onto that one guy's back and started biting," Walker said. "He'd have laid me out for sure if not for you." "What sparked that?" Sleek lifted her wings a bit with a crude approximation of a human shrug. Her crest lifted with embarrassment. "It felt like the kind of thing you guys would do for me. Only fitting to return the favor." "Well said," said Haverford. "You know, you Xenos didn't turn out half bad, as we thought you would." Sleek glanced down at attack plot and sighed. "Fun's over, boys. That looked close enough for you." Walker nodded, and Haverford said, "Time to make the call." He rested a hand on Sleek's shoulder as the Neji keyed the fleet-wide channel. Its weight felt good. Engineering Deck TAS Redoubtable Soulgate. Slater had a pulse rifle now. He'd picked it up from the Smith's corpse while the surviving Marines and engineers had scrambled back into the reactor compartment. They'd sealed the heavy containment doors behind them, and it hadn't taken long for the ripples to start tunneling through. He could hear them munching away at the reinforced walls that enveloped the reactor chamber. But so far they'd only broken through into a handful of places. The 9 remaining humans in the compartment were more than capable of blasting apart any replicators that tried to widen the holes further. "What do we do when they bring down the door?" asked one of the engineers. Spacer Connor. Slater doubly remembered. He hadn't been paying that much attention to names. "Don't worry, son, I've got a plan for that." He didn't. They'd lost the last compartment when the repels had eaten through the door's manual locking mechanism. That had let them all pour in at once. They could repeat that trick at any moment, and Slater had no idea how to react when they came swarming through again. There was nowhere else to run. The strap holding Haverford's prototype dug into Slater's shoulder. The lieutenant removed it absently, setting it down on the ground beside him. An idea struck him. "Corporal, want an upgrade?" He tossed his functioning rifle to one of the remaining Marines. Slater wasn't even going to try and recall the woman's name, and he picked up the prototype. The crudely modified weapon was, after all, only one step away from a bomb. When the locking mechanism gave away, Slater was ready. He ripped the door open and dived out into the seething mass of replicators, the sharp claws stabbing into his flesh as he screamed out in agony. But he held onto his strength long enough to hear the dull thud of the door slamming shut. Then he jerked a screwdriver that he jammed into the pulse rifle's last remaining safety circuit and squeezed his eyes shut tighter. CIC TAS Redoubtable Soulgate. Lieutenant Dross jumped as an explosion rang out through the ship. It sounded like that it had come from the engineering deck. Had they overloaded it too early? Had the replicators gained access to it? No, of course they hadn't. They still held the reactor. When they did blow the matter annihilation core, the explosion would be a lot bigger than whatever had just happened. A edgy voice cracked out of the speakers on the comms officer console. It was the only operational station left on the CIC. All ships, this is Sub-Lieutenant Sleek Wing's Gentle Glide. It's time. That's it then, said the captain. Her hand hovered over the switch that would be broadcast her voice over the ship-wide intercom. One of the few systems that remained functional. She paused. Every one of you is a goddamned hero. She stabbed a thumb down onto the control panel. Merkel's voice rang out through the redoubtable. One last time. This is the captain. Detonate the core. Soulgate. The swarm closed in on the crippled home fleet. If it had been capable of feeling emotions, it might have felt satisfied. It had been capable of anything like rational thought. It might have thought that it had won. A spear of scout ships as fast attack craft launched themselves at the swarm, grazers and missiles tearing open the small, treacherous path. One scout ship sheltered in the middle of the formation survived long enough for its message to break through the swarm's jamming, but none of the vessels escaped the replicators. They brought the Terran Alliance a warning with their lives. One scout ship kept back, holding formation alongside the TAS Redoubtable. It watched the swarm approach. The replicators drew within 100 kilometers of the fleet. The Terrans did nothing. They closed the distance to 50, then 10. Still, the Terrans did not respond. It wasn't until the swarm was a mere 100 meters away that every human warship overloaded their reactors and exploded. One ship burned ever so slightly brighter than the rest. The fireball tore through the swarm with the fury of a small nova. Millions of invaders were ripped apart, vaporized by the intense heat and radiation. Light from the explosion sailed out across the solar system. It would eventually carry the bridge of the dewdrop, where 2 humans and an Edgy waited to salute the sacrifice of thousands. The home fleet did not go quietly, and the swarm victory cost the invaders dearly. But some of the machines escaped the destruction. Some of the machines turned their attention towards the heart of Sol, towards the belt, towards Mars, and towards Earth. End of chapter.